I've probably said this before, but one of these days we're going to record the pre-show. We're going to record the pre-production because that's the content.
Is that the Patreon content?
One day, one day we'll get there. All right, a couple things before we get started this week. No, I did not get a chance to look at the Janet Jackson documentary, but we will get there, especially for Black History Month. Remember, a few weeks ago over dinner, we were talking about what the kids just don't know. They didn't know that such and such happened, in the 80s or even in the 90s. And I feel like Janet Jackson is one of those figures. The kids don't know Poetic Justice. Much
Agreed.
less the albums.
Sure.
They were not there when she partnered with her brother Michael and came out with the song Scream and the music video Scream. I think to this day it's still the most expensive music video period, like that was ever done. I mean, and we haven't even started talking about Escapade and Rhythm Nation. I mean, all the way back to Control. Anyway, shout out to Janet Jackson. She will have a spot on Triloquy for Black History Month, so don't worry. I just need to get a chance to look at the documentary. Before we get started, there's something I have to read today.
You have a read?
We're getting official. The views expressed in this episode, I need y'all to listen carefully. The views expressed in this episode are those of the speaker and do not reflect the views, opinions, or official policies of the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Today's third movement features Shaina Rush, who is a member of the Old Guard Drum and Fife Corps. She's going to talk about the Black origins of it all, but because we have a real life government agent, she asked that I read that official statement so that nobody up there in the government is trying to give it to her. So if y'all have some smoke for Shaina, you actually have some smoke for me. Come to my house and try to make me shave my head and go to boot camp. And I'm talking big. Don't let them reinstitute the draft. Anyway, hello everyone. This is Opus 136 of the Triloquy Podcast, the first opus of the Triloquy Podcast for Black History Month. So we're gonna have a downbeat this week from God himself. Has anyone played God more than Morgan Freeman? I feel like it's been, even if it hasn't been more than one time, that's the character that I think of him.
And every time you see a meme with his picture, you automatically read it in his voice.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
You just hear him.
Of course. Well, about 12, 13 years ago, he made an appearance on 2020, and he had this to say on the subject of Black History Month.
Black History Month, you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month?
July, by the way.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Look at him stammering.
Okay. Which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh. Why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me.
All right.
See, you got all caught up in the voice.
I'm not going to say anything first. I want to hear your thoughts on what we just listened to.
I've heard people make all of those points. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, why ridiculous was the word that he used.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you not understand why do you not share his perspective?
I'll answer that question as long as you acknowledge the fact that you avoided my question.
I think that I pulled a Garrett. Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll loop back. What did I think of that?
Yes.
I think that he makes valid points.
Okay.
And I do not begrudge him his perspective. I sit and I listen to him and I give him, I'm just saying that's your opinion, man. All right. And he's not waving it in my face.
Yeah.
So he can go and have it.
That's my reaction is similar. I respect my elders. I respect my black elders. So Morgan Freeman can definitely have that opinion. I'm not going to try to diminish or invalidate his opinion. And there are actual answers to some of those questions that
Mhm.
are often posed in a lackadaisical sort of way. First and foremost, the question of why is there a Black History Month? Well, folks who ask that question, I feel like don't understand that there used to be a Black History Week
Week.
alone. You know, 1 week out of the year to acknowledge Black people. You
And
know,
it's the shortest month.
as messed up as as race relations is in 2022, go back when and imagine what the ecosystem was. So damn, we can't have a week to celebrate Black achievement, and then of course that expanded into the month that we have now,
Mhm.
and that expanded over into different countries. Not all countries is February. I think in England Black History Month is October,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, I
But
think you're
anyway,
right.
the concept spread across the globe, and now people around the globe have a time to specifically acknowledge the achievements of Black folks, especially when we consider the way that the education system traditionally has centered that whiteness. We all know George Washington cut down the cherry tree allegedly, and we all know about Abraham Lincoln being a vampire hunter or whatever. They will stretch that part of the history until we know it. So why not have a month where we can specifically think about Black folks? By the way, I say that White History Month is July because of 4th of July, and I'm just supposed to forget about the fact that my ancestors were slaves while y'all are around here talking about the Ramparts red glare and stuff. So that's White History Month then to me.
It's I thought it was every month.
But you said it. You said it. Okay, so there's that point. The the
It's not
the
wrong.
the next point, and let me repeat myself. We love you, brother. Morgan Freeman, legendary figure. And I hate to start Black History Month this way, but it's certain things that have to be acknowledged. Not talking about racism is how we got here. How often, and this is not a judgment on you as much as just a statement of fact. How often was racism talked about in your periphery growing up? I'm sure there were times. How often was racism against Black people a key discussion?
No, it's become more frequent the older that I get.
So
Yeah, so it was infrequent when it was in the formative years that I think you're talking about.
So, with that in mind,
Mhm.
with the frequency of discussing racism growing, do you think we are closer to or further from anti-racism today than in your earlier years?
Um,
You think
it,
we're
it's
you think we're more racist now than we were 20 years ago as a society,
I
30
think we
years
are
ago?
I think we are as racist and only more visible or vocal about it.
I I feel like saying that we shouldn't talk about it toward getting rid of it is ridiculous.
Trevor Noah
That's what
said
I'm getting at.
after the 2016 election, Trevor Noah made a comment about how this election gave white supremacists they said all of a sudden now we can be more open. Now we can be this way more vocally.
Mhm.
And his joke, or maybe it was David Chappelle, that
One of them.
yeah. But the joke was, no, no, no. You need to be just as quiet as you were before. You need to be, not publicly
Yeah.
that was the point being made. And I believe that. I think it just became more visible.
If anything, I feel like making it more visible has struck something among, the so-called good white person, the white folks who are striving toward anti-racism. I often think about the hashtag Me Too moment of a few years ago. I've never engaged women sexually, romantically, anything like that. So there are certain conversations that I have never thought about and had never been privy to. The visibility that violence against women, sexual violence against women was given in that moment woke me up
Mm,
because I didn't have the opportunity to even think about that. And
right.
now I think about
Hmm.
that all the time. And how can
Right.
I promote gender equity as well as racial equity? So, in the same way, and not conversely, but in the same way, I feel like the visibility helps dismantle the racism because there are people who have to admit to themselves that it exists.
Mm.
So for me, that's why, and that's how talking about it leads us toward a less racist society, because we have to see a thing to name a thing. See, and we have to name a thing to change a thing, but we can't change the thing or name the thing if we don't see the thing.
And we're all measuring differently too, because when all right, let me start this again so I don't sound like I'm stammering. The change that I see happening within the structures they're happening in,
Mm-hmm.
I feel the earth move. To other people who have been doing this work for
Of
all
course.
their life,
Yeah.
it's tiny.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about that too.
Yeah.
About what scale are you measuring this on?
I mean, think about the people who knew George Walker,
Mhm.
who are old enough
Mhm.
maybe even to have known for a few years William Grant Still, Florence Price, who knew Duke Ellington. So if an institution programs one of their pieces for Black History Month, of course they're rolling their eyes, when to some people, that's a huge step because they've never heard those things. Anyway, and I as we're talking about this and the so-called ridiculousness or not of Black History Month, I also acknowledge that it has been hijacked traditionally, at least in a way, to relegate Black achievement to February. So I also
Mhm.
understand that.
Mhm. I've heard that
I
too.
believe in it though, because as we celebrate Black history as American history all year, February gives us a time to focus in on that, in the same way that March gives us an opportunity to focus in on the accomplishments of women.
Mhm.
In less problematically, in recent years, I'll say, when we get to Cinco de Mayo, we're taking the opportunity to learn more about that specific event and then the culture that surrounds it. We focus in on gratitude and joy and capitalism in in December. So that's not to say that we aren't happy and joyful all year round, but this is a time where we really put even more energy toward it. So in February, it's that for the Black folks. I understand, the broader point that he's making. I did a panel, and of course I'm forgetting her name right now. She did the brown eye test, very famous white woman who's an anti-racist and has been having those provocative conversations for a long time. Y'all know who I'm talking about. I'm just blanking right now. I get and fully understand and agree with the construction of whiteness and blackness, and how at the end of the day we're a human race and X, Y, and Z. I get that. I feel like we aren't far enough from the origins of those constructions to just pretend like they're arbitrary. I'm not 7 generations hardly. If I really count, I think about what, 5 generations from the plantation,
Mhm.
from slavery.
Mhm.
So you can't tell me that blackness is arbitrary, because my connection to that directly impacts today and some of the decisions that I've had to make, and some of the ways I see the world. And
Mm.
conversely, it's the same for white folks and anyone else. So I get the point, but we can't pretend like certain things and certain histories don't exist. And I also understand that, we all don't have to think the same way. We're not all a monolith. My reaction to Mr. Freeman's opinions on Black History Month, are a testament to that. We aren't all of the same mind, but there are certain things that Black History Month helps us get closer aligned with. A decolonized way of looking at American history, a decolonized way of thinking about Black music, within it. And then how can we move forward in this more equitable way, treating each other's accomplishments more equally based on the equity that's pushed through a concept like Black History Month. That's my idea on it, but we're just a couple guys trying to change classical music, right? So-called classical music.
Are you trying to tell me that he was basically giving you the all lives matter approach to Black History Month?
I think so, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm Garrett McQueen,
I'm Scott Blankenship.
and this is Triloquy, Opus 136. Thank you so much for tuning in. To returning listeners, thank you for continuing to return and really help Triloquy grow into its own little institution we have here. I've been talking with so many artists, managers, and representatives about folks trying to be on Triloquy as guests. I really appreciate all of that warm energy, and none of it will be possible without each and every one of you returning week after week. So thank you so much for continuing to go on this ride with us. To new listeners, Triloquy is a podcast that takes the phrase classical music and recontextualizes the music that we attach to that phrase, the conversations that we attach to that phrase, and everything in between. To learn more about the Triloquy podcast, to find out how you can donate and how you can support the show in other ways, just visit our website. That's TRILLOQUY.org. In addition to your support for Triloquy comes from Springboard for the Arts, a local organization here in St. Paul built to help artists create a living and a life. More information on Springboard for the Arts at springboardforthearts.org. I also want to send a shout out and a huge thank you to the Maria Issa from Minnesota State Representative District 62B for allowing me to host the celebration event this past weekend. Scott, I've hosted a lot of things, never hosted anything hip hop adjacent. So needless to say,
Cool.
I was a little nervous. I didn't know what I was gonna do because I'm not the sort of guy that's like keg and case, make some noise, or, but
I could hear you doing it.
we all have to stretch ourselves. That's what being in community is about, right? Doing what we can and even more. So a huge shout out and thank you. More information on how you can support Maria Issa at mariaissa.org. Those are all of my announcements for this week. So let's go ahead and hop into movement one. Let me get a couple of really, really, really quick accidentals out of the way, Scott. First and foremost, I have a natural. Last week in the second movement, I celebrated this really incredible performance from the guitar that sounded just like an Indian raga, and really it was.
Hmm.
I announced the artist as the title of the piece. The title was Rag Ahir Bhairav, a morning raga. The guitarist goes simply by Sariputra. So be sure to go check out Sariputra and check out all of the incredible things that he's doing with the Western guitar, playing his instrument in a different language, so to speak, as we were saying last week. And then I also want to send up a quick sharp to not only the legacy of the late Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, whose birthday passed since the last time we recorded, but also to a member of the Triloquy family, incredible ethnomusicologist John Silpayamanat, for posting a happy birthday to the White Chevalier. Beautiful. I mean,
That's very good. Very good.
Because they called the man the Black Mozart forever, right?
Right.
Anyway, I'm glad that not
That was
only
very good.
not only is the ecosystem getting a little bit of a sense of humor, but getting a sense of humor that's connected to some activism. You see, there's always something serious in the mix. Even the sweetest dessert has a little salt in it, right?
Mhm.
So we have to be sure to keep that energy going. Anyway, huge shout out to John Sopayamanat, and I suppose a happy birthday to the late Mozart. I mean, the world's most famous artist, history's most famous musician, I would say.
Among them, sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and then of course, as is every week at this point, I don't know, maybe we need to have another section to the opus, some rest and powers that we have to offer. First and foremost, to Chelsea Christ. It's been really. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. I heard about this a few days ago, and it's been going around everywhere. If you don't know, Chelsea made history as the oldest Miss USA champion in the 68-year history of the show at age 28. In addition to that, she was an attorney, Emmy Award nominated, just was doing all sorts of stuff, and an incredible figure out here. since her death, she died by suicide. There have been a lot of attention put on some of her tweets, and in
Mhm.
particular, one essay. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this essay because I think it's really important for us to think about and talk about it. She wrote here, "I nearly worked myself to death, literally, until an 8-day stint in a local hospital sparked the development of a new perspective. I discovered that the world's most important question, especially when asked repeatedly and answered frankly, is why? Why earn more achievements just to collect another win? Why pursue another plaque or medal or line item on my resume if it's for vanity's sake rather than out of passion? Why work so hard to capture the dreams I've been taught by society to want when I continue to find only emptiness?" That question, why, Scott, I think takes a lot of courage to honestly ask. And while Chelsea lost the battle against suicide and mental health, we all need to ask ourselves that question, why? I have the privilege to get to ask myself that question every day when I wake up. Why am I going to walk into this studio and work on something or research something or interview somebody or whatever, I'm doing on a day-to-day basis? Why? And I feel like there's passion behind it.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel like a lack of passion and the expectation to keep that drive going can really be a deadly combination.
I agree with you. I did not know her work. I did not.
Yeah.
Tell me again about how I might recognize her if just
I
in
mean,
media.
Miss USA, it was the most famous thing for me, but she
Mm,
was a television correspondent, so
probably in.
and maybe maybe you aren't even not being familiar with her, you can't deny that being an attorney and on TV and Miss USA requires a lot of work, far beyond what either
Sure.
of us do.
Yeah,
I would
or
go as
have
far as to
done.
say, sure.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um,
I mean, but what do you think? I guess what do you think about that question? Why do you what's your relationship with that question?
um, I haven't asked that much in my background, which is I guess a testament to how I got where I am.
Hmm.
Not really a big risk taker because of how I was brought up.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to start to retrain yourself after so much repetition. We're talking decades of repetition for me.
Hmm.
And again, the changes that I've made and the work that I'm doing now might not register for a lot of people, but in the circles that I work in, mountains are being moved right now, in my opinion.
And certainly when we look back at the time, the change, doesn't happen in front of your eyes. It happens over time, right? So
Hmm.
I think that's always important to think about and acknowledge. Rest in peace and rest in power to Chelsea Christ. Who else passed away recently, Scott?
Howard Hessman. You might recognize Howard Hessman as Charlie Moore on Head of the Class, but I knew him as Dr. Johnny Fever from WKRP in Cincinnati, 1980s and early 90s. No, just a 1980s
Hmm.
television show where he played Dr. Johnny Fever, who, when the excuse me, when the series opens up, it's sort of a 101 strings sort of radio station, all schmaltz, and he's the morning guy and he can hardly stay awake and he gets to change the format in grand fashion.
Mm. Now, what did his character, because you have to remember, I barely know what this show is, so a lot of people have never heard of it.
Hmm.
Who was his character on this show, and what do you think we were supposed to learn from that character, considering what we just were talking about with overworking, asking yourself the question why, all of those things?
Well, that era, DJs moved around a lot. You might as well not even fully unpack. You
Mhm.
get a storage facility and something where if you break the lease, it's not going to break you.
Sure.
And you might find yourself working at the greatest station in the country one week, and then the next you're doing polka in Sheboygan.
Mhm.
So um, he represented somebody that, in one respect, was getting ground up by the system, and at the same time had a spark for the medium that they believed it was. And I think it's evidenced in that when he does get to change the format from this easy listening over to rock,
Mhm.
you see him light up because all of a sudden now he's talking about what he cares about and
And
what the
now there's
medium.
what in his work? Passion.
Mhm.
It's not just him falling asleep at the controls every day trying to stay awake. Now he has a reason
He
to
has an
care.
investment, and he gets to say booger on the air.
So that's it's that's why I wanted to just bridge that gap, because when we talk about transforming, maybe you can use the phrase changing the format of so-called classical music, radio stations, concert halls, and everything in between. I feel like you can have a little bit of that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a switch from the easy listening to the rock or whatever happened in WKRP. But I think that that idea is important, and
Mhm.
that inspires me to think about the passion that can be infused in countless people: the musicians, the hosts, the researchers, musicologists, the program note writers. Shout out to Delaney. You know, there that could grow. That
Mhm.
that passion can grow, and it's only going to enrich the field. So, rest in peace to Howard Hessman as well. Do you happen to remember? I'm putting you on the spot. What the song was that flipped the? Of course, that flipped the format.
Actually, they did not know if this show was going to get picked up, so everything was done on a really low budget. It was just some generic sound that they did, some generic band that
Oh,
they
it wasn't.
paid,
It wasn't an
and
actual.
they didn't have to license it.
Oh,
It was
interesting.
all improv. And you can even tell by the credits they didn't think that this was going anywhere because it looked like they set up the camera right outside the studio, pointed at the river on a cloudy day, and there's a tugboat going by, and that's in the credits.
Okay. Well, I don't have time to sit here and search for that moment in the show, but at least the theme song, when it comes to music, is this one of the classics? Is this a classic television theme song?
Cincinnati, WKR. I can't sing it.
Got kind of tired of packing and unpacking, town to town, up and down the dial. Maybe you and me were never meant to be. Just maybe think of me once in a while. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.
They don't really sing theme songs anymore, do they?
That's
What a
a
time.
relic of that era in the industry. Yeah.
So smooth, so smooth.
Yep.
All those. Anyway, I hope folks understand the point I'm making. After every accidental every week, I feel like I have to reiterate my point. Let's think about not only when it comes to the legacy of Chelsea, the way that she was in that essay talking about that lack of passion. Let's connect that to the story of Howard Hessman's character on WKRP and how shifting things can breed that passion and how we could all be better from that, anyway.
It lit a fire because up to that point, he had to look at his coffee mug to figure out which morning name he was.
Right.
And
right.
then Dr. Johnny Fever was born in that moment.
And then, of course, shout out to, what was the man's name? Venus Flytrap?
Venus
Who
Flytrap,
was
Tim
that?
Reed.
Tim Reed, yeah. Great show. I don't think you can stream it, but you have it on DVD. So if y'all want
That's
to
right.
watch it, y'all just got to call Scott. All right. What you got accidental wise?
I wanted to highlight this story that came out 2 days ago. I found it on National Public Radio.
Is this a sharp?
This is a sharp, right. There is a book that is out called The Violin Conspiracy, and the headline goes, "The Violin Conspiracy Shows What It Can Be Like to Play Classical Music While Black." And to give you the broad strokes, what it is the author, Brendan Slocum, is a violinist, and he teaches and plays, out in the community. And he wrote basically his life experience as a novel. And he did what he had to do in certain spots, to amp up the drama or to change things so that people's names were protected or whatever it is, So he made a novelization of his life. How about that?
Yeah.
There were a lot of things that he talked about that the interviewer would ask him, now, are you serious this happened? This actually went down? And he says, well, I changed it so that people wouldn't be able to tie my family to it or whatever. But there was one in particular that I thought was a really good hook. In the novel, this is the interviewer. In the novel, it seems like it's not just the pressure of white or black people who are threatening Ray's career. He is at one point sued by his own family when he's also facing a legal claim that the descendants of slave owners who owned his ancestors say the violin is actually rightfully theirs. So he's trying to find...
What?
Yeah, so his violin got stolen while he's going to play the Tchaikovsky competition. And he gets sued over
Over the violin.
over the ownership of the violin.
Oh, I can't. Okay. But that is an interesting story. So you say that's not one of the ones he's exaggerating.
Right.
Oh my goodness gracious. Not the violin, also a slave. The violin itself. Didn't we have I'm not trying to make a joke, but did we have the Fugitive Slave Act? So now this stolen anyway, go ahead.
I think it's a great example of work being done at different levels because while he might not be, out there playing with the likes of Gooseby.
Randall Gooseby,
Randall Gooseby, so he might not be out there and have the platform that Randall Gooseby has, but he found a different way through this book.
When I think about musical aesthetics, I'm also thinking about literary aesthetics. So the aesthetic of the book Twilight is very different than the aesthetic of Harry Potter, is very different than the aesthetic of 50 Shades of Grey, right? So I'm just making sure you understand what I'm saying. What do you see as the general aesthetic of this book? As spicy as some of these stories are, I'm sure, is this for a different audience than the typical classical audience that's around today?
Who do you think the audience is?
I asked you.
I know, but you always ask me and you make me say black people. So now I want you to say who you think who this is for.
I'm not sure if it's for me. I'll say that. I'm not sure it's for me.
Okay.
But as we were talking about at the very opening with the downbeat Morgan Freeman, shedding light on some of these issues is important, and that turns a light bulb on for certain people. So for the people who need that light bulb turned on, this is for them.
Okay, so that's what I was going to say, is that some people need to start out at Privilege 101.
Sure.
Before they go on to 110.
And maybe I shouldn't say that, because I'm sure that there are some black folks who know nothing about classical music but are attached to the fact that this is a black man talking about all this stuff. That could be engaging for them. So I shouldn't dismiss the book.
So you're right. That's the point that I was going to make, is because each week I come over here and I'm stepping into a space where there are people who don't like me and say so and think, okay, anyway, so we know that exists. So why shouldn't a black person come over and try to talk to the white people in a similar way?
No, I agree. And
to work at that level,
and it's very important. Now you're gonna have me reading this book. So now I'm officially curious. The more I think about it.
I think it's a great example of another way to deliver the message.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't sound like it's your bag, maybe somebody that would be a good starting point for.
Yeah. Remind me, is Violin Conspiracy by
Brendan Slocum.
By Brendan Slocum. Well, yeah, that sounds exciting. I'll have links to that in the description. Before we move on real quick, I just need to say that, yes, there are plenty of people who don't like you, who feel away. I think we all have that. I certainly have that. The people who don't like you aren't in positions of power. They aren't gatekeepers. So I think that's the difference. So, to all of y'all who have something to say about Scott or to Scott, you saying it to me as well. Okay. So if you have an attitude, send it to me and deal with me, because you're not about to have. Anyway, I'm trying to take up for you.
I appreciate that.
All right, well, we're going to transition out of this story about the Violin Conspiracy with a little excerpt from a performance by Black Violin. I can't remember whether or not we had to have featured them on Triloquy at some point, but they're a violin duo who is out here just doing the Lord's work. This is their flip on one of the Brandenburg concertos. The track is called Brandenburg. Music here is performed by Black Violin. Scott, you have, we're talking about Howard Hessman, right? You have in real life been at radio stations where the format flips,
Yep.
right? Where it changes. Okay. So let's say we're not talking about a complete format flip, because I don't think what we just heard should be disqualified as a piece of classical music, just to make that point as an aside. You're at work and this is on your playlist, and you're probably not paying attention because you see Brandenburg on the playlist and you're like, oh, okay, whatever. You click go, you hit the number 1 button or whatever, and you hear that.
Something like that's happened.
React. Where's my button? Here we go.
Well, I might.
What are you gonna do in the moment?
In the moment? What, am I gonna turn it off?
I'm asking you, what are you gonna do?
What am I gonna do to get to the top of the hour? No, I would let it ride. And it's easy to do, because if anybody complains, I can say, well, I'm gonna forward your comment on to the music director. Thank you. And if somebody writes in and says, this is great, I say, I'm going to forward your comment on to the music director. Thank you. I am just the intermediary, but I would talk about it. I would give it a good break. And I played music with an electronic beat behind it recently, because I had to fill in.
Really?
I had to fill in a couple extra eclectics, the 2-hour show that Steve Seal does with all the, living composer stuff.
Mm-hmm. I need to challenge I think we all need to challenge ourselves, because I can see myself in that position, and I can see myself wanting to instantly not apologize for it, but, to say to the audience, look, I know that's a little different for some of y'all. It's okay that, or however I will form that break. But see, I think we need to evolve to the point to where we wouldn't even do that and talk about, instead of their, excuse my language, white feelings, who black violin actually is, or make the break about that,
Exactly.
And that's something
right.
I put on myself as well.
Right. Don't go the apology route. Don't go the get ready for this route.
Right.
Instead you promote it.
Right.
You give it all the ups rather than the, hey, be careful because this is different than what you're used to hearing, or whatever you're going to say.
If I remember, there was a piece of music down in Knoxville that I used to air every Valentine's Day, and it was one of those, okay, listen, this is going to be a little different for y'all, but it's only 2 minutes. And I hope I can remember to play it. I don't think it's by a black composer, but yeah, in interest, I see that moment for you. Before you retire from classical radio, you are going to have an 808 to deal with. And it's probably going to make a BuzzFeed or somebody's going to take that break and put it on their podcast. So you be mindful of that. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, I have, we'll keep it just to those few accidentals this week. I have one more. I'm going to give it a sharp, and I'm going to give it to the annual Sphinx conference and competition.
Online again, right?
Online again. It was supposed to be in person. I paid my registration fee and everything, but they pulled the plug on it being in person, understandably so. I feel like the main reason that many of us attend every year is to network and to hang out. I mean, there are people in real positions of power at this point who you have sat across the table with, not only in a shirt and tie capacity, but at a loose meat sandwich at 1 a.m. capacity as well, so
my favorite.
So at the Sphinx competition, I'm talking about for folks who don't know. So anyway, so it's always going to be a little different if it can't be in person, but the virtual conference offered a lot, and I really enjoyed checking it out as an onlooker. I'm usually participating in some way. I think this was the first time in like 10 years where I wasn't doing anything with Sphinx, and I'm gonna keep it real. This podcast is called Triloquy. At first, I took that personally. There's somewhere I need to add it to the board. Somewhere there's Michael Jordan saying that, and I took that personally. But anyway,
you got a lot on your plate, though.
I have a lot on my plate, and after thinking about it and chanting over it, what I realized was that my concern is not about me having another microphone or some more exposure or something. I just wanted to make sure that the hundreds, if not thousands of people who view Sphinx as the epicenter for this sort of work, these sort of conversations, I wanted to make sure they were getting the realness of it, as well as some of the institutional perspectives on some of these conversations. So, it wasn't about me just wanting to be in all of the rooms. I just wanted to make sure that all of these people had an opportunity to hear something real, and they absolutely fucking did. Okay, so I'm just gonna highlight a few moments that I appreciated. First and foremost, I watched a panel facilitated by my teacher, my former teacher, Lacolian Washington. Shout out to Lacolian. It was a panel about the new CEO. So we had Lacolian there, who runs his organization in Boston. Melissa Nan, shout out to Melissa Nan. She is at the head of the American Composers Orchestra, and all kind of folks who are relatively young and now in charge of these organizations, sitting around and talking about what the path forward looks like. Well, Anwar Nazir, who is in charge now of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra down in New Orleans, he had a couple spicy things to say. First and foremost, he said that predominantly white institutions are predominantly white by design. Racism is denying that as a fact, and anti-racism is accepting that as a fact. What are your thoughts on that? Because most, if not all, of the, I shouldn't say all, but certainly most of the so-called classical institutions across the ecosystem are, if not all white, predominantly white. So what is to be
I
done
think
with
that
that and from that statement?
I think that you can go back to any number of Triloquy past opuses and find that we've been talking about this quite a bit. And the one that leaps out is the one where I was talking about John Coltrane's Love Supreme.
Mm-hmm.
You have to acknowledge the problem, you have to apologize, and then you have to persevere. You have to go forward without doing that again.
Mm-hmm.
And then isn't the end forgiveness, then asking for forgiveness?
Sure.
I
can't. You know the movements more than I do.
So yeah, but you see what I mean, that there's
Yeah.
there's a step, there's a process, and that sounds like a great first step.
Yeah, and shout out to Anwar. I mean, I don't have the capacity. If I canceled everything and only did the job that he has, I don't have the capacity for it, because they just wouldn't. I feel like they wouldn't have me up there, because I would talk to the music director or whatever one time, and by the time that season is playing, the board is going to be like, okay, we need to get him out of here.
Oh no.
But so shout out to Anwar. I wrote something down here that Lacolian said. I know that we have covered this a few times, several times, but it's always worth repeating. He said, "Change is slow." That statement is a statement of privilege, and I feel like we just need to revisit that idea as often as we can, because there are folks for whom change is urgent and needs to happen for the sake of our success and our happiness, our passion in the field. And there are people for whom that change doesn't have to happen, despite your feelings on certain topics, or if you're a good person or a bad person. The fact of the matter is, across the gender lines, across the race lines, there are people in certain positions who don't need change to happen right now. Okay, so how do we deal with that? You're one of these people, and let's keep it real, who does not need change to happen right now to have a successful career. What do you do? Where do you get the fuel for that sense of urgency? It's not maintaining yourself. So what is that fuel?
I love public broadcasting. I want to see it progress. I want to see it last. I want to see it be as meaningful as it was for me when I was coming up in both television and radio, and now online. I want it to be successful. And in order to do that, we cannot follow this same path. And what Lacolian just said, that people were getting the fire emojis out, when I say it, I'm the dick.
Well,
right?
But the truth is the truth, right?
That's why I said it.
Yeah.
And if it caused someone if it lit a fire under somebody to actually pay attention and start making changes, then I will take all the hits.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have evidence of that yet.
So what we need people who love the art forms, orchestra, chamber music, radio, more than they love how it currently looks or how they think it should be. If you want it to survive, there are certain things that you have to do if you love it that much.
And I also realize that in order for it to survive, that means people like me stepping away from the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to help as many people who are not white men get on a microphone and tell their stories, do the shows they want to do, and shape their sound the way they want to shape it. That is my goal.
And we've talked about this before as well. It's very noble for people to want to step back for more stories to be told. What are they stepping into? What and I'm not saying you specifically, but what are you? What are people leaving behind? If you leave, let's picture the image of the corner office,
Mhm.
and you want equity in the building politics. So, you leave the corner office for the person of color to work out of there. If you've left papers all over the floor, if the desk is turned over, if there are pictures on the wall that don't represent the diversity of whatever, that is not a space that's safe for that person, or at the very least, that is space that requires labor out of that person of color before they can even get started. And I feel like that's what we're doing in the arts field so often. We're creating these spaces. Some people, not all, we're creating these spaces, but at the same time, we aren't making sure that those spaces are safe, or
Mhm.
that people can be successful in those spaces. So I just think, I feel like I have to name that because it requires both of those things. It requires some of us to step back. And before we step back, we have to make sure that we're creating something, or we've cultivated something that another person can be successful in.
Mhm.
I picture Triloquy one day way down the line to continue without us,
Mhm.
to have a couple women here doing the work under the brand. I have to make sure that I cultivate and maintain this project so that it can live in someone else's arms. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's a part of the conversation that we're missing at the institutional level when we're talking about putting the black person in this orchestra. Is it safe for that black person in this orchestra? Do the members of that orchestra have the ability to celebrate and in an equitable way honor the work of that person? Just as one of countless examples. So
I 100% understand your perspective. I have to come at it playing the long view
mhm,
of if I don't do this, if I don't try to find the next generation of
yeah,
broadcasters and classical musicians, then I don't know that the work is going to continue at, how do I put it? I don't know who else is going to do it to the degree that I am.
yeah, yeah. I watched
And
I watched a documentary all week. Instead of watching Janet Jackson, I was watching this documentary about Radrish. Maybe you remember the Indian guru who
mhm, mhm, mhm.
lived in Oregon for a while, and there was
They had a
drama.
commune.
Yeah.
Yeah, got violent.
And a statement that was made on both sides of the argument, the townspeople of Antelope and the folks in the commune, was, all, I don't have it verbatim, but all evil needs is for good men to do nothing, and that's what I hear you're saying right now. If you're not going to do it, you are doing nothing, which means you're actually participating in the active maintenance of these spaces.
Mhm. You got right to essentially what I was trying to say is that if I didn't try to find the next generation or help the next generation mentor in some way, then I wouldn't be in the position to help at all. And
Hmm.
then nothing changes,
Yeah.
or it goes even slower than it's perceived in the past
Right,
at
or
its
or
slow
than it
pace.
should be, or whatever, right? See, all of, again, back to my point of being relieved to hear some of these conversations happening for the people, again, who see Sphinx as that epicenter.
Mm.
I know that I can engage the conversation and have the privilege of being able to in certain ways, and I was just so glad to see other people really digging into these conversations and not really putting people's feelings in front of what needs to be said. Michael Bobbitt, who was also on that panel, he had me in here screaming at my desk. He said he wants to know, how diverse is your contact list? Are the
Mhm.
photos in your phone diverse?
Mhm.
And I put that on social media, and I think that's just another incredible point. We have leaders in the field, the best meaning of them don't actually have real proximity to communities of color. So
Right.
so how does that shape the way that you think a fellowship should go, or hiring a black person should go? What do you understand about the conversations you need to have around Black History Month,
Right.
around Kwanzaa,
Great point.
around
Yeah.
Juneteenth, all of those things? So that's something that we have to think about as well. A person is not qualified in 2022 for leadership positions in the arts if they do not have real proximity to diverse communities.
Right.
And that's just that. Um, Anyway, we're running long here already, but but before we get away from this accidental into the second movement, I just want to offer a huge shout out to Katie and Delaney, who did a live taping of Classically Black this year for Sphinx. Something that I wrote down here that Katie said. She said Black people do everything. So when we're talking about finding talent and developing talent and all of those things, it's already out here. Black folks have learned. I mean, if we play hockey, I've been hearing about Black hockey players lately. If
Mhm.
we can do that, of course we can play the violin. Okay, so stop playing like you have to find the talent. Okay, anyway, shout out to Classically Black and Katie and Delaney. And then of course the main panel that I wanted to make sure I was able to get. The title of it was Shame or Reframe. It was sort of a conversation about activism versus collaborative initiatives with institutions and X, Y, and Z. Aaron Dworkin was on this panel alongside Quanice Floyd, Titus Underwood, and Daniel Bernard Romain, all three of which have been on Triloquy, and we've
Mhm.
had these conversations. And Quanice was really, really, really laying it out. I mean, I have to offer a round of applause for Quanice. She, and as high up as she is in her career and in proximity to these powerful institutions, she is the first to acknowledge that the inside work has to happen alongside the outside work. And I feel like so many folks on the inside diminish the quality and the necessity of the grassroots anti-racist activists, the folks who are doing their own things, the entrepreneurs in these spaces. I feel like that unbalance kind of maintains that schism. And I just hope, Quanice specifically has inspired me. I just hope that we can learn to see each other. Those of us who want change from the outside and do it some way, maybe we call out institutions, or we have a blog or a social media thing or a podcast or whatever. I want to see that work leveled, not leveled. I want to see that work put on the same level as the VP of whatever at this opera organization who's doing this thing, or the folks you at your job at Minnesota Public Radio. I want those two things to be valued equally. Do you think, I mean, from your inside perspective, do you think that that value is seen for the outside work?
I personally value people who are on the ground at the protests and marches and, getting on TV and radio and all that.
Hmm.
Um, Hats off to you. That's not me. And we need you to do that. And I respect that. But I 100% agree with what you're saying about seeing these things on the same level, because there are people on the inside that are doing great things.
Yeah.
And if they're doing them properly, they're not bragging about it. So agreed. We should be able to see these on the same level. What I do to try to is that what you're asking me? What I do to acknowledge the
Sure,
on the ground work?
or what you do to affirm yourself as on the same side as the person fighting for change from the outside.
I I have to show them.
Hmm. And
And I have to, most of the people that I'm going to be interacting with on that way don't trust me in the first place. So I have to just know that and be ready for it and earn the trust.
I don't think that's racial. See, that's the thing. You hit the nail on the head there. There's some. I'll speak for myself. I won't try to speak broadly. I am often challenged by allegations of change on the inside because we can't see it. We don't see things put on the line. And folks like me, I have to live publicly.
Mhm.
I have to do this work in front of everyone.
Right.
So at the very least, I need folks to acknowledge the privilege to go to this board meeting and having this uncomfortable conversation and getting in your car and going home and enjoying the fruits of your salary when there's so many of us who don't have
Mm.
those things.
Mhm.
So I'm going to work on me. I'm going to do my best to do a better job of acknowledging inside work, because I do fully affirm that it is happening. I just need the favor returned. I need folks within these institutions to consider themselves compatriots
Right,
with
right.
those of us, and our work as equally vital. And that's what Quanice did on that panel. She really affirmed the fact that you do not have to be working in one of these big boxes to inspire change, or to have your change work be valid or considered valid. Incredible conversations happened at this Sphinx conference. Congratulations to Alpha Dworkin and Aaron Dworkin, to all of the speakers. Huge congratulations. I didn't mention the competition yet. Huge congrats to Kibra Seyun Charles, a bassist who actually won the Sphinx competition. That
Very
that doesn't
cool.
happen very often. And actually, this musician was featured. His music was featured on Triloquy before, so I always feel good feeling like I'm in the mix. And then I just wanted to also offer a shout out as we transition into the second movement to Rhiannon Gittens. She gave the opening keynote for the Sphinx conference. Are you very familiar with her work, her music?
Some of it. Only recently she showed up in the headlines. They announced that she's pregnant.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Congratulations.
congratulations, and warm thoughts on your pregnancy journey. Rhiannon Gittens, is and she's been suggested as a guest many times. I'm sure she's way too busy for me. I'll send an email, but the way in which she engages what we call what a lot of people would recognize as folk music,
Mm-hmm.
folk TM,
Mm-hmm.
however you want to say, and just showcasing the black origins of it. We kind of talked about that with Rissy Palmer, but
Right.
as we decolonize the phrase classical music, we also have to remember that country and folk and all of these other autochthonous American aesthetics, if not involved in blackness, is rooted in that blackness. And I just love that Rhiannon Gittens is out here doing the good work in that way in the world of folk music. So to get us into the second movement, we're going to listen to a tune called Black Eyed Dog. This is featuring both Rhiannon Gittens and Ben Harper.
Black-eyed dog, he called at my door. Black-eyed dog, he called for more. Black-eyed dog, he knew my name.
I'm going to read a few words here from Ben Harper before we get into the second movement. He said, Rhiannon and I are both black purveyors of American roots music. And while this is not an anomaly, it is an exception within a subculture. It's really interesting how something common can be marginalized.
Sure.
I never would have considered folk music or what they call here roots music as something that I should care about or consider myself as having some proximity to, but here we are.
I'm a little irritated. I didn't know about this project, so I'm writing this down.
Oh yeah, Black Eyed Dog. I'll have it in the description. We're here in the second movement where Scott and I take some music that we have been listening to, some music that we appreciate, and instead of repeating it fully, here we take the second ending and sort of speak to its significance to us. We're in Black History Month, Scott, and I think along those same lines of roots music and folk music being black, you're bringing in some, we've talked about the slide guitar here before
Mhm.
and how I feel about that aesthetic. You've opened my eyes to so many black slide guitar players and traditions. So,
This one's different.
okay,
And
go for it.
Yeah, and I don't know the correct pronunciation of his name, if it's actually AJ Gent or if it's Agent,
Oh,
or
okay.
Agent,
Okay.
something like that. So, apologies if I bungled it. However, his sound is rooted in the slide technique, right? But lap steel. So when I say lap steel, do you know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so imagine that twang in and out of the notes, that sliding in and out of the notes, but the guy's sitting at a table and he's got all the strings set out in front of him.
Okay.
And he's playing it on his lap.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Imagine playing a regular guitar on your lap and then standing up.
And doing
So
that.
instead of coming underneath the fretboard like you would to form a chord, he's coming in on top. Technique that I have not seen before. He's the first guy I've ever seen doing
Sure.
this. And what I think is the end result is a much more singing sort of a quality in the guitar, the way that he so accurately rises and falls up and down
The
the fret.
intonation you're saying is
Right.
impeccable.
And he's hitting all of these things and not slurring them together. It's punctuated but connected.
So what do you call the glass thing he's holding that I'm sure you put your finger in and other
Well,
is there a name for that?
they used to use empty bottles, so sometimes they're called a bottle slide. I just hear people say, "Hand me my glass." I like to use brass and ceramic.
And see, what my point is, what I think is interesting and exceptional about this performance in particular is that it showcases his spin on a classic. I mean, when we talk about defining classical music and all of that stuff, if Going Up Yonder is not a classic, there's no such thing as a classic. I mean, shout out to Tremaine Hawkins, who
Mm.
from in my experience made the song famous. So I think there's that bridge to be built as well. We have folks who understand the aesthetics and the technique of that style of music, and then you have generations of Black folks who hear that and hear themselves. They hear someone singing that in church because of course we can sing it, but now he is translating it to the guitar. Really, really incredible stuff by Agent, I hope, or AJ Gent.
That's pretty good,
I
isn't
think it's
it?
Agent, maybe.
Right.
We'll have to double check that.
But you said that in the Southern church and in the Black churches, that's Sunday morning. That you just get that.
Yeah, the trope is, musicians are, at least where I'm from, musicians are busy on the weekend because Saturday night you're playing the bar and on Sunday morning you're playing the church,
Right.
and these are the same musicians and this is the same sound and same aesthetics. They wouldn't do that in my church that I went to regularly, but that definitely exists. And I really, really appreciate the connection between that aesthetic and a classic composition.
I would point everybody to his social media on Instagram. He has some absolutely incredible videos that he's shared from live performances and things.
Mhm.
And most recently, he's been posting little riffs and then letting it play out and asking people to respond.
Sure.
So
He must have a TikTok because that's where they do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Probably, but I'm not going there. I get it on Instagrams.
Agent. Bravo. Bravo. All right. Well, this week I wanted to bring back an ensemble that I had showcased before as a transitional thing several weeks ago. I played some music by a group called 24 Karat Black. We were talking about the Cincinnati, speaking of WKRP, tying it all in. We were talking about, remember when the Cincinnati Orchestra, I think, got a new contract and we were talking about all their new money
Right.
So the connection I made was finding a Black Cincinnati ensemble. Anyway, I want to bring them back because I've been listening to their music ever since and they deserve a little bit more attention, at least from me. So the group is called 24 Karat Black. I'm just going to read a little bit of their information for the sake of Black history here. It says that they were an American soul and funk band who recorded in the early 70s. Although they only released one album, the album called Ghetto Misfortune's Wealth. Their music has been sampled numerous times and considered a classic among many. It was the album was produced and arranged by Dale Warren, who was the nephew of Berry Gordy, one of Berry Gordy's wives. So all of that music industry stuff. The band was known originally as I forget. Let me scan here. The D'Italians. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but Dale Warren was like, no, we need a new name. How about 24 Karat Black? Anyway, so he worked with them and created this work of art. It's so symphonic, especially near the beginning. I've played some of it before, but the specific track that I've been repeating is called Food Stamps. See, you probably don't know nothing about that. You don't know nothing about no food stamps. My mom used to buy them from people because you can only buy food with the food stamps,
Right.
which means you can't buy diapers for your child. You can't buy a bottle.
Right.
So she would do that, to help folks out. So I remember the different colors. They have the EBT cards now. Anyway, the track is called Food Stamps, and what it reminds me of is how important it is to not get caught up in making things more complicated than they have to be. This tune goes, and all it is a few different layers. And I've had it on repeat. So let's listen to a little bit of this. Food Stamps by 24 Karat Black. I love that. You think they play that on WKRP? Would that make the
Maybe
would that make the playlist?
maybe on Venus Flytraps. Yeah,
There are so many.
he had a gong.
Oh, he sure did, didn't he?
Yeah,
There are so many ensembles, black ensembles, who we will never talk about in the same way that we talk about the Supremes or the Vandalas or any of these groups. 24 Karat Black is an ensemble that I just happened to stumble upon trying to make a connection producer wise with the city of Cincinnati. And I guess they're going to the Super Bowl now, right? Cincinnati Bengals.
That's
I don't know. Don't ask me
crazy.
about sports. I don't know. But go check out 24 Karat Black. Again, the album is called, what's the name of the album? Ghetto, Misfortune's Wealth. And actually that title track is dope as well. I almost brought that in, but when we talk about building music, you're the composer of Triloquy's musical themes. When we're, dealing with them before we release it, I feel like more than we're adding things at the end, we're taking things away.
that's right.
So that's the concept. That's why I'm bringing that in, because listening to it over and over again all week just reminded me of that. When we create things, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be music. Maybe it doesn't have to be so ornamented.
Even though, shout out to the producer though, because that once this was all laid down, even though there is only 4 or 5 tracks, they still went in and did fine tuning
Oh
on
yeah, of
each one of
course.
those.
Especially
That
back then, you have to do it on tape or
right.
whatever y'all were doing.
It's called magnetizing it.
Well, anyway, those are our picks for this week. So those will be in the description of this for you to check out. All right, we're getting into the third movement. As I mentioned before, I am so honored to have featured today Shaina Rush from the Old Guard Drum and Fife Corps of the United States of America. So when you watch the inauguration and that sort of things, the folks dressed up in those colonial uniforms and those powdered wigs, and that's a conversation we actually get into, of course, knowing me.
Right.
But she's there. She's this black flutist who has not only opened up that world to so many more people just being there as a representative, she has dug into the research of helping folks understand the black history specifically of drum and fife corps. It's really interesting when you go back and think about the Revolutionary War. They didn't want to give black folks a gun, so they gave us a fife and a drum. But goodness gracious, what have we done with those instruments over these hundreds of years? So Shaina speaks to that, the black history of drum and fife, and what it's like to be a military musician. We often talk about airmen and army people and seamen, sea women, and all of those things, but we don't always center the musicians, right? So it was really great to get.
They got to go through basic too.
Exactly, yeah. So and they're just as much
Right.
members of the military. So it's really cool for me to get a bit of that perspective on Triloquy. Once again, I will say the views expressed in this interview are those of the speaker and do not reflect the views, opinions, or official policies of the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. We are here to say a little bit about the history of drum and fife. So to get us into the interview, I wanted to highlight a group that has maintained the Black tradition of it over the years that Shaina put me on to. They're called the Rising Star Fife and Drum Band, and this performance comes from the Smithsonian Folklife Channel. I want to share a bit of this to get into my conversation with Shaina Rush from the Old Guard Drum and Fife Corps.
Actually my first year in the Corps. I joined in February of 2020. So there was an official statement put out on behalf of the military that they're in support of Black Lives Matter. And that was during the time that I was getting certified as one of the diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists. I'm the equal opportunity leader. Mm-hmm. And so I was going through training and people were asking questions like, well, do we have to support BLM? Is that a political movement? And there are a lot of people who thought that that was a movement that shouldn't be supported because it's political. But the military recognized it as a civil rights movement and that it shouldn't be controversial. So that was a little encouraging, I think. It sparked a lot of conversation within the military.
Yeah, I'm sure military support of Black Lives Matter upset a few people, but
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is. We officially have the military support. You
Yep.
mentioned you're coming in February of 2020. Just looking around, especially when it comes to content put out by the Old Guard, which we'll talk about. It's hard to find a video that doesn't feature you. At least it's been hard for me to find a video that doesn't feature you. I wonder
Yes.
I wonder if you feel a sense of pressure or maybe even responsibility in your position as a Black woman coming in at the heel or at the very beginning of this whole renewed Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of pressure. And I don't think that's something that organizations ever recognize, is that when there's one Black person or one person of color, there's so much put on us to represent everybody and to be the face, because there's only one face. Yep. So I was doing interviews. I was asked to be interviewed for Black History Month. And that was a little controversial because I told them I didn't want to do it because I was tired of being the face of everything. I've always been, as a classical musician, always been in a predominantly white environment. Mm-hmm. So that's not anything new. But as a professional, I just don't want to have to put up with it. So I told them, they should do some research and try and find something to feature about Black history instead of putting that on the Black person in the group and making that another thing for me to do during our month. I didn't get to say no to that, but we did switch it. We switched it to, that's what sparked my research in Black Fife and Drum Corps, because I had just finished my article with the Flutist Quarterly. And so I was able to talk about that. And, but besides that, I really did feel like I was the face until I'm in charge of our social media now for the Old Guard. So I'm behind the camera. So you see a lot less of me. But yeah, at the beginning, I definitely felt like I was carrying all of the DEI initiative and just helping them check off a box for a while.
Well, if the Old Guard Twitter account or something starts to get a little petty, we'll know who's behind it then.
You know it's me. I'll try to keep together.
For folks who don't know, what is the Old Guard?
Okay, so the Old Guard is a historical unit. It's the only one of its kind in the United States, and they're the official escort to the president. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have never even heard of it But if you pay attention, you'll notice that there's a group who's wearing red coats and a white powdered wig, and we only have 3 instruments.
Yeah, we'll get into that part, but go on.
Yeah, yep. So they're colonial uniforms. We do we pretty much service all of the military district of Washington. We do state funerals. We do the inauguration is a change of command essentially, so we do that. Other change of commands, retirements, and things around Arlington Cemetery. The point of the Old Guard is to preserve the tradition of George Washington's army during the Revolutionary War. So Revolutionary War is kind of our specialty. We've dabbled in Civil War stuff, but essentially we just tell the story of America. And this story has been told, of course, through a white lens until about 2020. And they're trying to change the script and well, talking about changing the script and include a more accurate depiction of American history, because telling it from George Washington's side, it sounds, fine, but it was not the same experience for everybody in America. So.
Yeah. I wonder if you can speak to the differences between your initial audition for the military and your audition for the Old Guard. I'm sure there had to have been very big differences.
Yeah, they were very big differences. I didn't have a traditional audition for the military. So there are 2 different types of bands or musical organizations in the Army. There's 42 Sierras, which are special bands, and 42 Romeos, which are the regional bands. Regional, we just travel every 4 years. We get restationed. We reach out to local communities. We also have secondary duties. Like sometimes we'll have to help with medical or pulling security, things like that, and we can deploy. Now, the special bands are the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, the United States Army Band, the Field Band, and then West Point has a band that services them. So these 4 bands have their own auditions, and I auditioned for the Field Band actually right before I joined the military, and I was one of the runners-up for that audition. So instead of, they were like, we can't offer you this job, but we will give you loan repayment and, all these other, nice fluffy things. And I was able to join that way. So I just did the Field Band audition, and it was on Fife, or not on Fife, it was on flute and piccolo. They're more musically based. They just want to know that you have musical ability. Regional bands also have something called the AMPA that they get scored, and it's a very rigid scoring system to decide whether you're qualified for a job or not. And then once you get your score submitted, they just choose you on a panel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways to get into the military. The Old Guard, though.
And maybe not that many ways to get out. But
yeah, right? We'll talk about that another time.
Right.
But yeah, so to join the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, we're the only one who has an audition like this, because we are based on marching abilities in playing, and mostly teachability, because not a lot of people who play the fife now played the fife before they came into the Corps. So my audition was, I submitted a packet. I had to do a full body photo. They had to make sure I was within regulation for the military height and weight standards. And then I sent in some recordings of me playing piccolo. So that was the first round and audition, or the resume and everything. And then once I got there, it was a 2-day audition. So the first day I played a few tunes from memory on piccolo. I had to march. I had to get some instruction from a drum major, and they saw how well I was able to adapt. And then I did a standing test, which was 20 minutes just standing in place, because we have to stand up to 90 minutes sometimes during these ceremonies. And someone actually passed out during my audition.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's surprisingly difficult at the beginning. But after the first day, then they will or will not eliminate somebody. It's just depending on what they like. And then there's more playing. You play the fife in March, and then you have an interview at the end.
Oh, wow.
So,
and
yeah.
I suppose that was successful for you. You're there now.
It was successful, yes.
Were there big social or maybe even musical onboarding challenges? What did those first few weeks as an official member of the Old Guard feel like? What do you remember from those early days?
I didn't know if I could do it. I really was like, why did I sign up for this? but it was exciting at the same time. So like I said earlier, I got here at the beginning of the pandemic, also February of 2020. So essentially we have 6 months of training usually. And usually there's more than one person who's hired at one time. I got hired by myself, and I was doing training during the pandemic when everybody was sent home to telework. So the way that I went through the training was kind of isolated. So it was a little more difficult because I didn't have anyone to show me hands-on. This is how you hold the fife. This is, just the simple things that are different going to fife from the flute. So it took me probably about 6 weeks to really feel comfortable on the fife, learning these new fingerings, not being afraid to play. It's not that pretty in a small room.
Sure.
So yeah, I had to get used to that. And then there's a lot of marching, and everybody in the corps has their eye on you because the standard is really high. So it's never going to go away. I always will have something to work on. Everyone will always have something to work on to make us look a little more clean and sound a little more clean. And not to mention there's a lot of memorizing.
Right.
So between memorizing, learning a new marching style, and then just being in the middle of the pandemic, it was a little rough at the beginning.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
And remind me, are you the first Black woman or Black person to be a member of the Old Guard?
Surprisingly, no. There have been quite a few Black people in the Old Guard. I don't know how many Black women there were. I know there were at least 2 before me.
Okay.
So, and I know the climate has not been the same. And I was wondering, as I was looking into some of these initiatives now, why hasn't this happened before, since there were other Black people before me? But I imagine that it wasn't encouraged to say anything about being the only Black person or calling out racism in the workplace because it wasn't a thing. People didn't want to acknowledge it. So 2020 was a really big year for the Corps in particular because they had to talk about it when they were able to, just kind of get on, and the Black people could just get on without saying anything and keep their heads down. So
yeah, and I was really, shocked to learn that not only is there a contemporary history when it comes to the Old Guard as far as how we know it and see it when it comes to Black folks participating, but a historical aspect of Black folks and drum and fife corps that I had no idea about. But before we talk a little bit about that history, I wonder how aware of that history are your colleagues and the rest of the folks in the military. Is this common knowledge, or is this something that they have recently learned as well?
Definitely, it's a recent thing for most people, especially in the military. But in the military in general, or I guess in the Army in general, a lot of people don't even know that this unit exists, let alone that we had any kind of like music in the Army. Doesn't seem like a thing until they go to a ceremony and realize it's awkward if there's no one playing music. Otherwise, no one's really they don't notice that we're there. So they're not asking those questions. But when I brought that to the attention of the people who were in charge of the regiment that I'm under, they were really shocked to learn this. They didn't know that Black people had a history like this. They didn't know that we weren't allowed to bear arms when we first started. And so we were still serving. And how did they make that work? So the pieces started coming together for them. And then within the Fife and Drum Corps, I was surprised at the amount of people who did know a little bit of history about individual musicians in the Fife and Drum world. So not necessarily our role during the Revolutionary War when Fife and Drum was brought to America, but as it's evolved over time, some key people who were Black, who just happened to be Black is how they put it.
Sure.
And we're in the world, yeah. So they're still playing the music that they play in New England and the Eurocentric kind of stuff, but they were integrated into the tradition. So.
I mean, being Black in the 1770s was more than just happening to be Black. I mean, a lot came with that. But so let's rewind back to that part of history, the 1770s, Revolutionary War. What do Black people, or what did Black people have to do with drum and fife back in those days?
So during the Revolutionary War was a really complicated time for African Americans, for slaves, because people who were enslaved were rioting a lot during that time, leading up into the Revolutionary War. So we were banned from being in the military, because if they give us a weapon, we could turn around and give it right back. Like,
And probably
we could use
would.
it. Yeah, if it was me, I would. So so it's understandable. But then the British started offering freedom to a lot of enslaved people, and so they were running away to fight for the British side. And at this time, it wasn't really a political. I mean, we view Revolutionary War, the colonial side, the Confederate side, the British, all of that is viewed politically now. But at the time, we were just trying to find somebody who would give us our freedom and who would let us live. So there were people who fought during the Revolutionary War. They were on the British side, they were fighting on American side, they were doing whoever was gonna give them freedom. And then during the Civil War, that was another thing. People fought on the Confederate side and the Union side, because it was whoever was going to get the best deal.
Yeah.
So in order to allow Black people to serve, we were on the field as drummers and fifers at first. So it would usually be a fifer and a drummer and a commander. And the commander was always white. So they would be under this command, and he would say, "Sound attention," and then, whatever the fife attention call would be, they would put that out, and everyone would know what the command was. So we were just communicating on the field, and that's what fife and drum was anyway. But we were the first ones to really be utilized specifically for that. During my research, it was really difficult to find this information. I think there are only maybe 2 or 3 accounts that I could go back and see this written in memos during that time, that Black people were only allowed to serve as medics, as musicians, as laymen, like people who just did non battlefield jobs, or on the artillery.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. So with that being the case, this being the start of fife and drum in the United States, I'm sure that it didn't stick with military adjacent things alone, especially, you have all these Black folks that have learned to play these instruments. How did the tradition evolve away from the military, or did it evolve separate from the military?
Yeah, it has evolved in a few different ways, especially, as far as for the Black community. There were people who wanted to maintain that tradition, the Eurocentric tradition, and play the battlefield tunes, because that's just what they knew. And even during the time, when Black people were serving as a little less than their counterparts, they were still included on the battlefield. We'd all still sing the same songs, and we still had that camaraderie because of the circumstances. So that's a really unique part of our history, is that that's one thing that brought us together during a time that that would never happen. So those people who appreciated that just kept doing that. We still see that in New York. There's the New Rochelle Fife and Drum Corps. They're called Charles Dickerson Fife and Drum Corps now. And they were started because they wanted to be in a Boy Scout troop and play in a parade in New Rochelle, but there weren't any Black Boy Scout troops. So they started their own, they got their instruments, and they were trained by Gus Moeller. If any drummers out there know who he is,
Sure.
Legendary. So yeah, that's one direction that it went, was just keeping it New England and keeping it Black. The other way was that it went south to Mississippi, Tennessee, I guess, around the southern area. There was now the Rising Star Fife and Drum Corps with Sade Thomas. She's a fife player, and her grandfather actually kept up that tradition. And that is more of a blues style. So people who went back home to the South would kind of fuse those together. They would have their battle tunes, and then they would put a little blues into there, a little spin on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of them included some spirituals too. So when you hear recordings of them, you'll hear oftentimes, the intro will be the fife, and then it'll go into a song and hymn, and then pick up on fife and drum again.
Wow. Yeah, we always add a little seasoning to things we do, even when it comes to
Yep.
that. Is there any proximity or relationship between drum and fife as it exists among black folks today, as you're describing in New York and Mississippi, and drum and fife as it exists in the military? Are those two iterations of the tradition joined in any way?
From my experience so far, which I am still very new to this environment, so I
Sure,
can't really
sure.
speak on it, But from what I've experienced, there hasn't been a lot of collaboration between the military fife and drum and the Southern tradition. But we do keep in touch and collaborate with the Charles Dickerson Fife and Drum Corps quite a bit. We're very close to them, and then the Southern tradition is just so, they really consider themselves to be more of like blues and folk
Mm-hmm.
influence, so they're more involved in that world. That being said, though, we are trying to get them to come and at least teach us something about it and talk about it, because it does need to be included if we're practicing fife and drum as a tradition in America. That takes a lot of different forms, and I can speak on Black people because I'm Black, but it
Yeah.
could even evolve into, there's Native American fives. There's people who are of Asian descent who have, their own versions of fives. So this
Mm-hmm.
could really be a little more inclusive and represent America better, if we just, take from our resources and learn how we see it in
Yeah.
different cultures.
Yeah. Why is it important, in your opinion, to learn about this bit of history? It seems pretty fringe, even
Mhm.
for music, but I don't know, pretty significant at the same time. Why is this a significant thing for us to understand and learn about when it comes to American history, not just Black history, but American
Mhm.
history?
Mhm. Well, America is just I mean, you've been here, we have our, our problems, we're struggling. And I think it's a lot of lack of understanding, no willingness to understand where we come from. And our history, I mean, history is not something that you can ignore because it's shaped everything that we see today. It's not like it happened way back then and then that's gone, that's faded away. I live in Baltimore. And
Mm-hmm.
if that is not the biggest example of how history just repeated itself and how we're still paying the consequences of what happened earlier in time, like I don't know what else is. So I think it's important for us to progress, to know the history of the people around us and the people who are contributing to America, to this
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And in the military in particular, the musicians are known to be ambassadors for the military. We're the face of the military. We try to, make it a little lighter, a little more approachable, because people should have a little more trust in us
Yeah.
than seeing us with weapons. So
Right.
five is less intimidating.
I don't know. A fife could be an oral weapon if you if
Ah,
you play it
yeah,
loud
you're right.
enough.
It could be a torture. But yeah, it looks a little more friendly. We can talk to the public, and that's a big part of our mission in the Old Guard. Is we want to do outreach and talk to people and use our resources to teach in the community and um, just be involved in the people around us. And being in DC, if we don't know the history of more than just white history, we're not reaching the majority of the schools in this
Hmm.
area, especially in the inner city. There are so many. I mean, you can't go anywhere in DC without running into one of every kind of person.
Sure.
So I think it will enhance the outreach we're able to do too, because then we're making it relevant to more people. As the social media manager, or one of them in the Old Guard, I see the kind of audience that is attracted to what we do.
Hmm.
And that's not what we're going for. So in order to get out of that, we have to learn about other audiences and reach out to them so that we're not just getting the same type of people
Right,
as
right.
our audience. Yeah.
I wonder what that has looked like for you, getting in the regalia and going to some of these inner city schools, these schools with really high populations of people of color. What has presenting in front of those groups looked like for you so far?
Well, I have not done any outreach
Oh,
since
wow.
I've been
Okay.
in DC, actually. But I was stationed in El Paso, Texas before this, which I absolutely loved. But El Paso is a border town. And so there are a lot of people of color, mostly people who are Mexican, or a lot of Black people who are military families.
Hmm.
So I was able to go into those environments, and it really helped. Of course, in El Paso, it's easy to get involved in the culture there. So we were always doing things that were relevant. We celebrated the Day of the Dead. We celebrated
Mm.
everything that they did. We just adopted it. And it was so cool to be able to be integrated. And we played at an immigration ceremony and chose tunes for people who were, we knew where everybody was getting their citizenship. And we played there and were able to, I guess, recognize people from different areas. So before I came to the Old Guard, I was able to see how that was successful. And in DC, I heard that we've tried to go to more diverse places. Like I don't know which HBC. We tried it. I wasn't there. Because if I was, I would have recommended something different. But the story goes that they went to an HBCU and they were booed off of the stage because they were wearing, look what they were wearing.
Yeah.
So if people don't understand what we're doing, if they see just this red coat and a powdered wig, I know I would be like, it's a little sus. So having someone like me, at least, I don't like being a token, but right. I do like being able to tell them, if you want to do outreach and you want to make a difference in other communities, you have to read the room. Yeah. So we're learning to read the room and figure out what's going to make people trust us. And by reminding them of colonialism, which is it's not pretty.
Yeah.
We have to face it. It is not pretty. We have to ask ourselves why we're trying to preserve it, how we can justify it with the public. If they're seeing this, why are we here? Yeah. So, just thinking about those things and recognizing maybe it's not relevant anymore. I don't know. But yeah, we have to kind of ask ourselves those questions before we go into environments like that.
Yeah, it's the aesthetic for me. Like you mentioned the wig and the uniform. I mean, do you ever feel a way? And I almost hesitate to ask this question because I don't want somebody in the military to have some smoke with me. But but do you ever feel a way just putting on this white costume, if I may use that language? Is that a challenge for you, or has that been a challenge for you in this type of work, taking your Blackness and muting it, not only in a musical way maybe, but all the way to putting on that white man's wig?
Yeah, it has been a journey for me, trying to figure out how I feel about wearing the uniform. Right now, I mentioned to you when we talked before the show, that I at first I thought it was a little bit out of spite. I'm here in spite of people thinking that I don't belong here. And I've been to places where one of the audience members came to me and said, we didn't used to let Black people like you into the Old Guard. I was in the Old Guard in 76 and I just never saw anyone like you. And he didn't say it. It wasn't positive or negative. He just came up and let me know I wasn't supposed to be here. What he said was false, obviously. But those things remind me that people don't want to see me here. And so if I can take up space where people don't think that I belong, and I'm doing a really good job at this job, I feel like I've taken to it really, really easily with the Fife. At least I always like to be at the top of my game.
Yeah.
And so
we have to be.
Yeah, you have to be, just like all of the Black people's experiences, all of us have to be the best. And so being able to do that in this environment has really been empowering. But that's the reason why I've been so invested in this research, because I know that we were wearing the powder wigs when we were, during the Revolutionary War, but it still was the same symbol and it was the same thing. So, I've been a part of a lot of conversations about this, and there's possibility things could change. They could look different or they couldn't. And I am just taking it kind of day by day, and seeing how much I can take, because I've been putting on the white man's costume, metaphorically, for so
right,
many years.
right.
Yeah, so now I'm physically putting it on, and it's like I have to ask myself every day if
Yeah.
it's worth it. Yeah.
I mean, and I kind of just want to ask directly, do you think there is a chance for that part of it, just the costume part of it, to evolve in 100 years, 200 years? Do you think the old guard is still going to look like how it looks today and how it looked 100 years ago?
Right, yeah. I really hope not. Um, I can only speculate because I haven't been in the unit very long, but I do know that the progress I've seen from the leadership in my regiment, and the regiment is kind of the overarching, real big army people.
Hmm.
The leadership I've seen and how it's evolved since I've been there has given me a little more hope, because there are people who are now at the top who are saying something and asking about why we do things. Because I've noticed that when people are invested in a tradition, they would rather not ask questions like that, because then
Sure.
it means that they have to reconsider what they've been doing forever. And that's uncomfortable for anybody. So as long as we continue to have people in leadership who are bold enough to ask about this and make some changes and make us relevant, there is hope that we could look different.
Is,
And if
is it?
anything,
I was just going to ask: is it risky? You say that are bold enough to ask these questions. Is it risky to ask these questions?
depending on your rank, it can be. Depending on
Okay.
who's on your team, yeah. So it's very political, just like any other
Sure. Orchestras,
committee.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's political. So
Yeah.
it depends on who's on your side, what influence you have, and the justification. So if you can justify it, it really it helps. Right now, also a nice justification was Biden did he kind of cracked down on seeing more diversity in the military bands, because he noticed that
Oh,
that was
really?
lacking. So so that started some conversations as well.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, where is your research taking you? Do you have lectures coming up, or what does that look like for you?
I have I have lectures coming up in the military. I guess we have
Oh, sure.
we have little classes for leadership development. So, but I am trying to go into part two of my research because I just skimmed the surface. So I'm on the research committee for the National Flute Association, and I will likely be publishing again sometime within the next 3 years. So
Yeah.
just keep an eye out for that. And I'm not really that good at social media, but I think that's the best place for me to share what I'm learning. I'm also in the library. We run the Center for Military Music, and I'm responsible for adding this part of history to our library. So that will also be available for the public once we're done with that project. So you can keep an eye on just the old guard Fife and Drum Corps, and you'll see me pop up.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
put it out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I could definitely picture you in front of a group of elementary school kids, maybe even in costume, for the week they're talking about the Revolutionary War. That
Yeah.
connection for a little black girl or a little black boy to not only see you in your skin, but to see you telling our story, actually making
Hmm.
it relevant. That's really exciting for me to think about. Is there a one-stop shop, a website, or anything that folks can visit to learn more about you and your work and everything that you're doing with the military and outside of the military?
Yeah. Well, right now Instagram is the best way because my website is currently being worked on.
Sure.
So I have Instagram, and I'll link the website. It's Powdered Cocoa. That's my Instagram, and my website, even though it's under construction, I can give you the name of it. So if you want to check back, it is Shameless. So ShaimlessFlutes flutes.com.
That sounds great. Wow. Well, I have one more question to sort of lead us out. Uh, speaking generally in the military, not just with the old guard or drum and fife corps, being a musician is a thing that a lot of musicians consider. You know, we get out of music school. I wasn't willing to cut my hair, so it wasn't a consideration for me. But I know a lot of
Mhm.
people who, get done with conservatory and their training and look for jobs within the military as musicians. Do you have any words of advice or encouragement to musicians who are just on the precipice of that decision, folks who are considering it but maybe don't know what they have to expect with that sort of career in music?
Yes, I have so many words. It's been quite the journey, but if anything, as much as I struggle, with certain things within the military, I think I would be struggling with it anywhere right now. So I don't want that to be discouraging for anybody listening to this.
Yeah.
There's still progress happening. So I encourage people to, if you want to join the military, go in with the mindset that first they're going to be providing for you. That's the biggest benefit that I've had, is that I don't have to worry about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the best paying job as a musician. So if you're joining like a regimental or a regional unit, you go to basic training and all of that. And so getting in shape is important. Being well rounded as a musician. So being able to play in different styles, or being innovative. Maybe you arrange, maybe you write. All of those things are welcome. And they also have a lot of support if you want to dive into something you've never done and you want to take a class or anything like that. So if you're looking to join the military, that's the biggest thing, is know that it is still the military. It's a great job if you have the discipline, and if you're willing to be a little flexible for anything that could happen in life. And reach out to whoever you can. A lot of military people love helping if you have questions or if you want to take lessons or anything like that. And everything is always free when it's through us. So, yep.
That's a little bit of the first movement of the Flute Concertino by composer Keith Gates. That performance featured the Air Force Heritage Band featuring flautist Master Sergeant Wayne Hendrick. I picked that to transition us out, Scott, because I went back into some of my programming lists to see what I was putting together for Veterans Day and those sorts of things on the
Mm,
radio.
mm.
And that piece was there, so I thought it was appropriate to share a flute piece. We have to never forget the significance that, and we've talked about this before, but I'll say it again, we can never forget the significance of military musicians to music education, especially when it comes to band. The so-called professional recordings, with the exception of the Dallas Wind Symphony and what they're doing at the University of North Texas, it's the military band recordings
Mm,
that we use as
mm.
the standard. And it's just so important and incredible that music and conversations about equity within music exist within the military. It definitely couldn't be me, but shout out to all of the service people. Yeah,
Mhm.
you come from a military community. Did you ever consider a career in the military?
Until 6 months before my first semester of freshman year, I was going to go in the Air Force.
And what happened? You realized that you had to do push-ups or what?
No, no, no. A guy that I was working with in a department store said, "Why would you want to do that?"
Again, getting back to the question that we were when we were talking about Chelsea in the beginning of this, that question, why?
Mhm.
It sounds like that the answer to that question led you down a
It would
completely
have been
different path.
it would have been a different life for sure.
Yeah. We're going to trill our way into the Triloquy movement this week, since we're, thinking about the flute, with a piece of music by another member of the Triloquy family, Dr. Carlos Simon. He has a piece of music for solo flute called Move It. And we're going to hear this performed by Bryce Smith, the performance of Move It by Carlos Simon, to get us into the fourth movement. I always hate to cut these recordings off, but can you not hear the seasoning?
I can.
That piece of music is seasoned.
I have a question for you,
You
though.
can hear the groove.
You could hear him playing the click
Mhm.
that the keys would make.
Yeah.
Is that considered a desirable or an undesirable sound while playing the flute?
I don't know. It sounded pretty cool to me. Well, how do you think it sounded?
No, because the reason why I was going to ask is because a lot of people, like when you lift your fingers up off the fretboard to get to another chord, sometimes you hear your hands run up and down the strings.
Oh, sure.
Some people do like that and they play that,
I think
and some don't. And I was just
think,
curious.
Well, I think what you're hearing is written. that's for the
That's my
for the-
question. That's my
and
question.
if and
Yeah.
and even if it's not written, it's for the effect of that groove that we can hear
Right.
with him playing the flute. Shout out to Dr. Bryce Smith there for that incredible performance. Y'all be sure to go check that out. All right, we're here in the fourth movement where I just get to say what I feel like I need to say on certain things. I'm gonna keep it quick. First and foremost, I put this on social media, and Scott, I want your opinion. So there, and I won't name the orchestra now. But we'll see how things turn out. But I was offered, the great honor of being offered a number of concerts with an orchestra. I haven't, subbed in an orchestra in a little while. I've done some performances, but that sort of thing, I was like, oh, well, I'm on somebody's radar. They want me to join them for a little while. That's great. I don't wear tuxedos. We've talked about church socks, right?
Right. Right.
I'm definitely not going to be around here on stage in a white shirt and a black bow tie looking like a dreadlock Uncle Ben. Okay.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
so my request is that problematic? Do I need to? Anyway, so what I said to the personnel manager was, okay, these are the services I can do. Thanks for inviting me. For cultural reasons, and I think that's the phrase I used, for cultural reasons, I no longer wear a tuxedo, but I'm more than happy to abide by all black, if that's okay. Now, that's not me being up there on stage by myself in all black, because traditionally, all women on stage in orchestras wear all black anyway. So it's not like I would stick out in that way, but I'm not putting on the colonized uniform. We were
Mhm.
talking about that with Shaina, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not going to do that in the orchestra field. He has yet to get back to me. My question for you, as I acknowledge the privilege of not needing every single thing that passes my desk, I can push the envelope or say no to things. I first and foremost acknowledge that as a privilege. Is that something that, from your perspective, I should consider arbitrary? Should I just shut my mouth and put on the bow tie?
Garrett, I think that that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, I'm not going to tell you to stop doing that or not stand by that.
So
Stick by that gun. My comment is that whether they accept your terms
Mhm.
and you come in and play, or they get somebody else, either way, there's going to be somebody there.
right.
And either way, it sends a message.
And that's why I say again, I have the privilege of not needing to run over to that gig. And I understand that. And I know that no matter what, somebody is going to be sitting there bigger than just affirming
Mhm.
me and my choices. Do you think it's arbitrary to have folks up there on stage looking like they're servants on an episode of Downton Abbey in the year of 2022 in a uniform that ultimately is not an American one that was adopted from overseas and all the colonial things we talk about with orchestral music and classical music? Do you think this is a battle on a broader scale than just me
No,
that's worth fighting?
It's worth fighting. It's a big piece of the bigger fight,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the more come as you are or come as you'd like sort of attitude is part of breaking down the barriers, some of the barriers
Yeah.
that we're talking about, meaning getting a younger audience in, people from diverse economic backgrounds. Not
Sure.
everybody can afford to put on something
Yeah.
flash.
And of course I'm gonna be fly because I'm gonna soup up the all black.
I think that's the point
There
that
will be
we're
different textures.
I think I think that's what we're getting at is, it's not like you're going to show up in
Right.
Crocs.
Right. Which I should be able to. Some black Crocs I won't, but
You wouldn't.
I think
You just said that you would make it
it's
fly.
a moment. It's a moment that I'm proud. I take a lot of pride in it, Scott, because this is one thing. The way that orchestras dress on stage to mimic the European tradition, that's one thing, but still one thing. So
Mhm.
what if we can break that down? I think it's the Philadelphia Orchestra that has officially switched. Everybody over there wears
Was that
all
right?
black.
Cool.
And, for me, aside from dismantling the colonial look and the classist look of it by getting rid of those tuxedos, I think we also deal with things like gender norms and binary gender expectations. Men wear this and women wear this is a very outdated way of thinking about anything, even the orchestral experience. So
Mhm.
for me, I hope that I get to report back to y'all in the affirmative, but I'm telling y'all what happened no matter what. This podcast is called Triloquy, so we gonna see next week. I'm also not waiting all week because I have to arrange my schedule and I have to be out of town
Right,
and all,
right.
and bring Dell with me, and all that stuff. So I'll report back, but I just wanted to let y'all know that that's something that we can do. That's change that we can impact. It may seem small, but is actually huge. So if you identify as a man, if you are a man playing in an orchestra, why not suggest to your personnel manager, hey, what if we wear something different? What is the worst that can happen? Half y'all got tenure anyway, so it doesn't matter. Just make the suggestion and let's try to push in that small way, but at the same time, that huge way. All right. And then in closing, I've been good about keeping us under 2 hours. In closing, Scott, I think we have to address the Spotify thing.
Mm.
All I have to say is, I'm gonna let you close it out. All I have to say is I was never particularly a Spotify user. I got Spotify to listen to the Joe Budden podcast when it was exclusively there. And I
Mhm.
say his name a lot.
Mhm.
His product, his approach to podcasting played a vital role in Triloquy, a direct inspiration. So, I followed that podcast wherever it goes. He's not with them anymore. And it's interesting that we're talking about Joe Rogan these days because he didn't like the terms that Spotify had for him. And then weeks later, we're seeing Spotify give Joe Rogan $100 million. I tried listening to one episode of that podcast, the episode with Mike Tyson. It's not really my jam. I'm not saying it's a bad show. It's just not my show.
Right.
Now, with COVID, false information and all of those things traveling around, for me that was just the final nail in the coffin. So Spotify, if they're gonna stick by putting money and energy behind that sort of content, that's their prerogative, and it's also my prerogative to move the show. So if you are used to listening this on Spotify, I guess you're not listening to this right now, or you found it somewhere else. I've pulled Triloquy from Spotify. I don't plan on going back. And then Triloquy tracks, if you just go to the website, you can see all the list of the music we talk about from episode to episode. And then there's a subpage on the website where you can access the playlists on Tidal. I'll work on getting it on Apple Music as well for the case of accessibility. How about you take us to the end? Why do you agree with this decision?
I quit Spotify back when I found out what they were paying per spin. That they weren't. So it's kind of like when you look at bananas are 69 cents a pound and you think that they got to put them on boats and all these people to pick, somebody's getting screwed.
Mm-hmm.
So that I had that realization with the music there. And so when this happened, it was no skin off. It didn't hurt me at all because I'd already deleted it. But I think I do think that it says something about a company who bills itself as a music streaming platform getting behind a podcaster.
Say a little bit more. We're running late, but say a little bit more. What do you mean? Getting behind a podcaster instead of a musician.
Instead of the musician. Yeah, I think that's telling.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. The things that in many ways we allege to support, we're actually doing something very different. We call out that sort of thing a lot here on this podcast.
You can't have access to everything recorded for $10 a month without somebody getting screwed.
Mm-hmm. The oppression of capitalism. All right, y'all. See y'all on Tidal or Apple Music or wherever, and we'll see you next week.